Easter dinner at my house should have been about family and gratitude. Instead, my son threw a glass of red wine directly into my face because I refused to let his in-laws move into my home. The glass shattered against my cheekbone, and I felt warm liquid mixing with something else, something thicker. Blood. My son stood there, fist still clenched, screaming that I was selfish for having empty rooms doing nothing. I didn't argue. I simply stood, grabbed my keys, and drove myself to the emergency room. While waiting with blood streaming down my face, I pulled out my phone and texted my lawyer 5 words. Phase 1 is complete. My name is Nelson, and I'm 65 years old. For 40 years, I worked as a civil engineer, designing bridges and infrastructure across Virginia. I retired 3 years ago, right after my wife Margaret passed away from cancer. We'd been married for 38 years, raised our only son Brandon in a 4-bedroom colonial house in a quiet suburb of Richmond. After Margaret died, people kept asking if I'd sell the house, move somewhere smaller, maybe one of those active senior communities. I refused every time. This house held every memory of my life with her. The kitchen where she taught me to make her famous potato casserole. The living room where we watched Brandon take his first steps. The bedroom where I held her hand during those final weeks. I'd learned to live alone, though it wasn't easy at first. I taught myself to cook more than just basics, kept the house maintained exactly how Margaret would have wanted, joined the library as a volunteer on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I read to children during story hour, helped seniors with the computers, shelved books in the quiet afternoon hours. It gave me purpose. I stayed active, walked 3 miles every morning, tended the garden Margaret had loved. My life had found a rhythm, a peaceful routine that honored her memory while allowing me to move forward. My relationship with Brandon seemed solid, or at least I thought it did. He called every week, usually on Sunday evenings. We'd talk about his job in sales, his wife Amanda, their 2 kids. My grandchildren, Chloe and Tyler, were 8 and 5 years old. They'd come over once a month for sleepovers, and had kept their rooms exactly as they liked them. Chloe's room had bookshelves filled with stories about brave girls and magical adventures. Tyler's room had toy trucks and building blocks scattered across the floor. I loved hearing their laughter echo through the house, filling spaces that had been too quiet for too long. Everything changed 2 months before that Easter dinner. Brandon called on a Wednesday evening, which was unusual. His voice sounded strained, careful, like he was rehearsing lines. He explained that Amanda's parents, Gerald and Patricia, were having financial troubles. Gerald's small printing business had failed after losing several major contracts. They were about to lose their apartment and had nowhere to go. Brandon asked if they could move into my house temporarily, maybe 3 to 6 months, just until they got back on their feet. I felt something twist in my stomach, an immediate unease I couldn't quite name. I didn't refuse outright. That's not how I'm built. 40 years of engineering taught me to gather data, analyze problems, make informed decisions. I told Brandon I needed time to think about it, asked if we could discuss it more thoroughly. He sounded disappointed but agreed. Over the next week, I asked him specific questions. How long exactly would they need to stay? What was their plan for finding new jobs and housing? Had they looked into other options, like family members on Amanda's side or temporary housing assistance? Brandon's answers were vague, defensive. He said I was overthinking it, that family helps family without needing a business plan. When I suggested we all sit down together to discuss expectations and boundaries, his tone shifted. It became colder, clipped. He said fine, but made it sound like I was being difficult. That conversation ended with an awkward silence, and I spent the night staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was being unreasonable. Over the next 6 weeks, Brandon's calls became less frequent. When he did call, there was an edge to his voice. He'd make comments about my big empty house, how I had all those rooms just sitting there unused. Amanda started joining the conversations on speakerphone, her voice sweet but pointed. She'd mention how her parents were sleeping on a friend's couch, how humiliating it was for people their age, how Patricia cried every night, how Gerald's pride was shattered. I felt the weight of their guilt pressing down on me through the phone line. I held firm, though. I explained again that I wasn't saying no. I just wanted to discuss specifics before making such a major decision. I suggested alternatives. I could help them find an affordable apartment, maybe offer some financial assistance for the deposit and first month's rent. I had business contacts who might know of job opportunities for Gerald. These offers were dismissed as insufficient, as missing the point. Family takes care of family, Amanda said. Family doesn't make other family beg. The Easter dinner invitation came with that same edge. Brandon called and said they needed to talk about the situation face to face, that phone conversations weren't working. I agreed, hoping we could finally have an honest discussion and find a solution that worked for everyone. I spent Easter morning preparing a beautiful meal. I made a honey-glazed ham using Margaret's recipe, roasted vegetables with herbs from the garden, my famous potato casserole that Brandon had loved since childhood, fresh rolls from the bakery Margaret used to visit, and an apple pie Id baked from scratch. I set the table with Margaret's good china, the plates with the delicate blue flowers around the edges that Shed inherited from her mother. I wanted the day to feel special, despite the underlying tension. Brandon, Amanda, and the kids arrived at noon. I opened the door with a smile, ready to hug my grandchildren. But my smile froze when I saw who was behind them. Gerald and Patricia stood on my porch, each carrying a large suitcase. Gerald was a heavy-set man in his late 50s with a thick gray mustache and a booming voice that seemed too loud for any indoor space. Patricia was thin and nervous-looking, her hands constantly fidgeting with her purse strap. They smiled at me like this was expected, like they'd been invited. Brandon walked past me into the foyer, setting down the casserole dish Amanda had brought. He turned and said casually, as if commenting on the weather, that head already told Gerald and Patricia they could move in today. They'd start bringing their things over after dinner. I stood there, frozen in my own doorway, feeling my stomach drop to my feet. This wasn't a discussion dinner. This was an ambush. I stared at those suitcases sitting in my foyer, beside the coat rack where Margaret used to hang her blue spring jacket. The handles were worn, the fabric scuffed. They looked ready to be unpacked, to claim space in my home without my permission. I found my voice, kept it calm and steady despite the anger starting to simmer beneath my ribs. I need to talk to you privately first, I said to Brandon. He waved his hand dismissively, already walking toward the living room. There's nothing to discuss, Dad. We're just helping family. That's what we do. Gerald didn't wait for any kind of invitation. He walked through my house like he owned it, his shoes heavy on the hardwood floors Margaret and I had refinished 10 years ago. He poked his head into the guest bedroom, nodded approvingly, then checked out the study. This one would work better, he announced to Patricia. Got better light, closer to the bathroom. Patricia followed behind him, thanking me profusely for my generosity before I'd actually been generous. Her voice was high and shaky, her eyes darting around nervously. She reminded me of a scared bird. Amanda busied herself in the kitchen, helping Chloe and Tyler wash their hands, pointedly avoiding my eyes. The children sensed something was wrong. They were quieter than usual, staying close to their mother instead of running to hug me like they normally did. I pulled Brandon aside into the kitchen, spoke quietly but firmly so the children wouldn't hear. This isn't how we discussed handling this, I said. Brandon's face hardened, his jaw clenching in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of my own father during his angry moments. You're being difficult, Dad. This is why we had to just do it. You would have found some excuse to say no. I'm not saying no, I repeated, feeling my patience stretch thin. I'm saying we need to establish clear boundaries and expectations first. How long exactly will they stay? What are the house rules? What's the plan for them to get back on their feet? Brandon stepped closer, invading my space in a way that felt aggressive. You're treating family like tenants. You're making them feel like charity cases. Mom would be ashamed of how selfish you're being. The mention of Margaret hit me like a physical blow. My wife's name in his mouth, weaponized against me. Margaret, who had taught Brandon about kindness and generosity, who had also taught him about respect and boundaries. He was using her memory to manipulate me, and he knew it would hurt. Don't bring your mother into this, I said quietly. Why not? Shed wants you to help. Shed wants you to open your home. but you care more about your precious privacy than your own son's family. I took a deep breath, counted to 5 like Margaret used to make me do when I was angry. Let's eat dinner first, I suggested. Then we can all sit down together and work out a proper plan. All of us, including Gerald and Patricia. We need to be on the same page. Brandon agreed, but his expression remained cold, distant. Fine, he said. But this is happening, Dad, one way or another. We moved to the dining room. I'd set 10 places, not knowing Gerald and Patricia would be there, but having prepared extra just in case. The meal should have been pleasant. The ham was perfect, the glaze sweet and sticky. The vegetables were roasted just right, crispy on the outside and tender inside. But the atmosphere was poisonous. Gerald dominated the conversation, talking loudly about his business plans, how he was going to start fresh, bigger and better than before. Had lost his printing business, he explained to no one in particular, because of backstabbing partners and a changing market that didn't appreciate quality anymore. He refilled his wine glass 3 times without asking, reaching across the table and sloshing drops onto Margaret's tablecloth. He criticized how Ede cooked the ham, said it was too sweet, that real ham should be savory. Patricia barely spoke, just nodded at everything Gerald said, her fork pushing food around her plate without eating much. The children were silent, uncomfortable. Chloe kept looking at me with worried eyes. Tyler held his mother's hand tightly, his little face scrunched with confusion. I tried to smile at them, to reassure them, but it felt false, even to me. After the main course, I stood to clear plates and bring out dessert. Brandon stood too, and before I could move toward the kitchen, he raised his wine glass. I want to thank Dad, he announced to the table, for agreeing to host Gerald and Patricia. It means the world to this family. I froze, my hands full of dirty plates. I haven't agreed to anything yet, I said clearly. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop onto Margaret's china. Amanda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Patricia's face crumpled like she might cry. Gerald's expression darkened, his eyebrows lowering, his jaw setting. Brandon's face flushed bright red, anger flooding his features. What do you mean you haven't agreed? Brandon's voice was tight, controlled, dangerous. I mean exactly what I've been saying for 2 months. I need us to discuss this properly, to establish boundaries and expectations before making this decision. Brandon slammed his wine glass down on the table, hard enough that I worried it might crack. They've already given up their apartment, Dad. Their stuff is in a storage unit. They have nowhere else to go. You knew this. We told you the situation was urgent. I felt a wave of cold anger wash over me. You did all this without my final answer? You made major decisions about other people's living arrangements before I actually agreed? Gerald suddenly stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His hand slammed down on the table, making the plates and silverware jump. You're an ungrateful old man, he shouted at me, his voice booming through my dining room. You don't understand what real family sacrifice means. You sit here in your big house, all alone, hoarding space while good people suffer. You're selfish and cold, just like Amanda said. Amanda burst into tears, covering her face with her napkin. The children started crying too, frightened by the yelling. Brandon didn't defend me. He didn't ask Gerald to calm down or apologize for speaking to his father that way. Instead, he turned to me with cold eyes and said, You've clearly already made up your mind to abandon us. You don't care about family. You never did. In that moment, standing in my dining room surrounded by the ruins of what should have been a family holiday, I realized something that chilled me to my core. My son had orchestrated this entire situation. Had brought Gerald and Patricia here with their suitcases to create public pressure, to make it impossible for me to say no without looking like a villain. Had counted on my desire to keep the peace, to avoid confrontation in front of my grandchildren. Had weaponized my love for them against me. I set the dirty plates back down on the table carefully, my hands surprisingly steady despite the chaos erupting around me. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and tried to find the boy I'd raised somewhere in this angry man's face. I'm not abandoning anyone, I said calmly. I offered multiple ways to help. I can assist with finding an apartment. I can provide financial support. I can connect Gerald with job opportunities. But I will not be manipulated into making decisions about my own home without proper discussion and mutual agreement. Brandon exploded. He took 3 steps toward me, his finger pointing at my chest like a weapon. You're so selfish. You're so controlling. Everything has to be your way, on your terms, with your rules. You can't just help people without making them jump through hoops. This isn't about hoops, I replied, keeping my voice level. This is about respect and communication. This is about not being ambushed in my own home. Amanda stood up, her voice shaking with tears and rage. Do you know what it's like watching my parents suffer? Do you know what it's like seeing them lose everything? They raised me with nothing, gave me everything they had, and now when they need help, you sit here in your mansion playing lawyer with conditions and requirements. This is not a mansion, I said quietly. This is a 3-bedroom house in a middle-class neighborhood, and asking for basic planning before people move in isn't unreasonable. Brandon's face twisted with something ugly, something I'd never seen in him before. He brought up my past, wounds I thought we'd healed years ago. You were never there when I was a kid. You worked 60-hour weeks. You missed my baseball games, my school plays, parent-teacher conferences. You were always more married to your job than to us. These were old accusations, things we'd talked about years ago. It apologized, explained the pressure I felt to provide, to build a secure future for our family. Margaret had understood, had said she understood. We'd supposedly moved past it. I worked hard to give you opportunities, I said, hearing the defensiveness in my own voice, to give you a stable home, to pay for your college, to make sure you never worried about money the way I did growing up. Brandon laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mom complained plenty about it. She was lonely. She raised me basically alone. You just don't know because she protected you from it, because she knew you wouldn't listen anyway. That struck deep, deeper than anything else, Ed said. Margaret had complained. Shed been unhappy. I thought back to our marriage, searching for signs I'd missed, and found my certainty crumbling. Had I been blind? Had I failed her in ways I never realized? Patricia suddenly spoke up, her voice trembling and desperate. Please, Nelson, please reconsider. I'm so scared. Gerald hasn't been sleeping. I don't know what we're going to do. We're good people who just had bad luck. We won't be any trouble, I promise. Well, stay out of your way. Please. Her fear seemed genuine, and I felt a pang of sympathy. But Gerald remained standing, arms crossed, glaring at me like I was his enemy instead of someone being asked for help. His anger felt aggressive, entitled, not like someone grateful for potential assistance. The children were crying openly now, clinging to Amanda. Chloe's face was red and streaked with tears. Tyler was sobbing so hard he was hiccuping. My heart broke seeing them so distressed. I looked at my granddaughter and saw fear in her young eyes. Fear of the adults yelling. Fear that her family was breaking apart. I took a deep breath, tried to find some middle ground that might salvage this disaster. I proposed a compromise, speaking directly to Brandon and Amanda. They can stay for 1 month while we work together to find a longer-term solution, but there will be clear boundaries, house rules we all agree on, and a written agreement about expectations. Gerald scoffed loudly. I don't need your charity with strings attached. I'm not signing contracts to live in someone's house like a criminal on probation. Then I can't do this, I said simply. Brandon's hands balled into fists at his sides. His whole body was shaking with rage. You have to give an answer right now, he demanded. Yes or no? Will you help this family or not? My answer is what it's been, I replied. 1 month with a clear agreement about expectations, or we find alternative solutions together. Those are reasonable terms. The room erupted again, Brandon shouting about how rigid and controlling I am, calling me names I won't repeat. Amanda sobbing about her parents being homeless, about how I'm destroying their family. Gerald cursing under his breath, muttering things about ungrateful old men who deserve to rot alone. Only Patricia was silent, looking down at her lap, hands twisted together. I felt exhausted, drained by the emotional assault. I announced that I was going to clear the table and suggested everyone calm down so we could revisit this conversation with cooler heads. I reached for the plates again. Brandon blocked my path. His face was inches from mine. His breath smelled like wine. Give an answer. Now. I've given you my answer, I said. 1 month with clear terms, or we explore other options. That's my final offer. Brandon's hands balled even tighter. His knuckles were white. For one horrible second, I thought he might actually hit me. The possibility hung in the air between us, thick and dangerous. Then he turned abruptly, walked to the table and grabbed the wine bottle. His hand was shaking as he poured the remaining wine into his glass, dark red liquid splashing against the sides. He held the glass up, and I saw something break in his eyes, something snap. "If you won't help us," he said, voice cold and flat, "then you don't deserve to be part of this family anymore." Before I could respond, before I could process what was happening, Brandon drew his arm back and threw the full glass of wine directly at my face. I saw it coming but had no time to move. The glass hit my left cheekbone with shocking force and shattered. Wine exploded across my face, into my eyes, up my nose, soaking my shirt. But mixed with the wine was something else, something warm and thick. I felt a sharp, burning pain along my cheek and jaw. I raised my hand to my face, and when I pulled it away, my palm was covered in blood. The glass had cut me, deep. Time seemed to stop. Everyone froze in a terrible tableau. Amanda's hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Patricia screaming, a high-pitched sound of horror. Gerald taking a step backward, his aggression suddenly replaced with something that looked like fear. The children shrieking, Chloe crying out for me, and Brandon, standing there with the broken stem of the wine glass still in his hand, his face cycling through shock, horror, and then hardening back into anger. Blood mixed with wine ran down my face, dripped onto Margaret's white tablecloth, spreading in a dark stain that would never come out. I stood perfectly still, feeling the sting of the cut, the wetness of blood and wine soaking my collar, the coldness spreading through my chest despite the burning pain. I looked at my son. I looked at the man who'd just assaulted me in my own home, and I said quietly, calmly, with a steadiness that surprised even me, "I think you should leave." The dining room was completely silent, except for the children's terrified crying. Blood continued to run down my face, following the line of my jaw, dripping onto the floor in small drops that looked black against the hardwood. I didn't wipe it away. I didn't move. I just stood there, looking at Brandon, waiting for some sign of remorse, some recognition of what had just done. Brandon's shock lasted maybe 3 seconds before his face twisted back into defensive anger. He threw down the broken glass stem, the sound of it hitting the table sharp in the silence. "This is your fault," he shouted. "You drove me to this. You're impossible to deal with. You wouldn't listen to reason." Amanda rushed to Brandon's side, not to me, not to check if I was okay, not to see how badly I was bleeding. She grabbed her husband's arm and started making excuses, her words tumbling over each other. "He's under so much stress," she said frantically. "He didn't mean it. You provoked him, Nelson. You pushed him too far. Can't you see what you've done to this family?" Gerald muttered something under his breath about me getting what I deserved for being stubborn. Patricia looked genuinely horrified, her hand pressed to her mouth, but Gerald pulled her back when she took a step toward me. "Don't," he said sharply. "Let him deal with it himself since he's so independent." Only Chloe seemed to understand that what happened was wrong. She broke free from her mother and ran toward me, her small arms reaching up, trying to hug me. "Grandpa," she cried. "Grandpa, you're bleeding!" Amanda yanked her back roughly, harder than necessary. A child that small shouldn't be grabbed that way. "Get away from him right now." Amanda snapped at her daughter. "Stay with Mommy." That action, seeing my granddaughter pulled away from me when all she wanted was to comfort me, broke something inside my chest. Something fundamental and irreparable, but I didn't show it. I walked calmly to the kitchen, leaving a trail of blood drops on the floor. I pulled a clean dish towel from the drawer, pressed it against my face. The white fabric immediately turned red. Brandon followed me, still yelling, still justifying. "You forced my hand. You wouldn't help." You have all this space, all this money, and you're too selfish to share any of it. What kind of father does that? What kind of grandfather? I turned to face him, the towel pressed to my bleeding face, and spoke with complete calm. You just assaulted me in my own home, in front of your children, because I wouldn't immediately surrender to your demands without discussion. Think about that, Brandon, he stammered, his narrative fracturing. It was an accident. You moved into it. I didn't mean for the glass to hit you. I shook my head slowly. I want all of you out of my house right now. Brandon's eyes widened, then narrowed. Fine, but if we leave now, don't expect us to come back. You'll never see your grandchildren again. You'll die alone in this house, just like you deserve. The threat was meant to devastate me, and a month ago it would have. But something had changed in me the moment that glass shattered against my face. I understood now, with perfect clarity, what I was dealing with. This wasn't a family disagreement. This was manipulation, abuse, and calculated exploitation. Take your family and leave, I repeated. We can discuss this when you're sober and rational. Amanda herded Gerald and Patricia toward the door, grabbing their suitcases from the foyer. Gerald made one final nasty comment about me being a failure as a father, about how he wouldn't want someone like me in his life anyway. Patricia looked like she wanted to say something, maybe apologize, but Gerald pulled her along roughly. Brandon was the last to leave. He stopped at the doorway and turned back. For just a moment, I thought I saw something in his face. Regret, maybe. Fear of what Head done. Recognition that Head crossed a line he could never uncross. But then it hardened again, his jaw clenching, his eyes going cold. You're dead to me, he said flatly. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the pictures on the wall. I stood in my destroyed dining room, blood-stained tablecloth, broken glass scattered across the floor, ruined Easter dinner growing cold on the table. The house was suddenly, completely silent. I walked to the hallway mirror and looked at my reflection. The cut ran from my cheekbone down to my jawline, about 3 inches long. It was still bleeding heavily, the towel already soaked through. The flesh gaped open. I definitely needed medical attention, but instead of calling an ambulance, I grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door. I walked to my sedan in the garage, got behind the wheel, and started the engine. During the 15-minute drive to the emergency room, blood soaked through the towel and dripped onto my shirt. My face throbbed with every heartbeat. But my mind was crystal clear. I thought about everything that had just happened, but I also thought about things that happened before, things I'd noticed but dismissed. Brandon's increasing sense of entitlement over the past year, the way Head started talking about my house as if it would eventually be his, how Head asked me 6 months ago to co-sign a business loan, had gotten angry when I'd requested to see his business plan first, questions about my will during Margaret's funeral that had seemed premature and inappropriate at the time, the way Head talk about my assets, as if they were already his inheritance being unfairly withheld. And I thought about 3 weeks ago, an incident I hadn't told anyone about. Brandon had come over alone, without Amanda or the kids. We'd argued about money, about a loan he wanted that I'd refused. Head lost his temper, pushed me hard against the kitchen counter. I'd bruised my ribs badly, could barely breathe without pain for a week. Head apologized immediately, blamed stress, promised it would never happen again. I'd believed him, or wanted to believe him. I'd taken pictures of the bruises, documenting them out of some instinct I didn't fully understand at the time. But I hadn't done anything with those pictures. Until now, sitting in the emergency room waiting room, holding a blood-soaked towel to my face, I pulled out my phone. I scrolled to a contact saved simply as J.H. Attorney, Joseph Harper, an elder law specialist, I'd consulted 2 weeks ago after Brandon's previous violence. Joseph had warned me this might escalate. Head helped me prepare for exactly this scenario. I texted 5 words. Phase 1 is complete. The response came within seconds, documented and recorded. Phase 2, ready when you are. Police have been notified per your instructions. I allowed myself a small, grim smile despite the pain radiating through my face. Everything that happened tonight was exactly what I'd expected. Because this wasn't the first time Brandon had been violent. And Id learned something important over my 40 years as an engineer. You can't fix a structural problem by ignoring it. You have to expose it, document it, and address it at the foundation. That's exactly what Id done. The nurse called my name. As I stood to follow her, my phone buzzed with another text from Joseph. One more thing you need to know. Brandon has a prior arrest record. 2 years ago, assault charge in another state. Charges dropped, victim paid off. Gerald bailed him out. Thought you should know before giving your statement. I stopped walking, stared at that text. My son had been arrested before, for violence, and he'd never known. Margaret had never known. This wasn't a one-time loss of control. This was a pattern. Everything made sense now. The anger issues, the manipulation, the entitlement, the violence that seemed to come too easily. My son had been lying to me for years, and tonight, with hidden cameras recording every moment from 3 different angles in my dining room, had finally shown his true nature in a way that couldn't be denied or explained away. The nurse looked at me with concern. "Sir, are you okay?" I nodded, following her back to an examination room. I was about to give a statement that would destroy my relationship with my son, possibly forever. I would lose access to my grandchildren. My family would shatter completely, but I would survive. And sometimes, survival requires you to cut away the diseased parts, no matter how much it hurts. The nurse, a woman in her 40s named Susan with kind eyes and gentle hands, gasped when she pulled the blood-soaked towel away from my face. "Oh, honey," she said softly. "This needs stitches." "What happened?" "Family disagreement," I said simply. She met my eyes, and I saw recognition there. She'd seen this before, that look said. She knew what family disagreements that left cuts like this really meant. She cleaned the wound carefully, her touch professional but compassionate. "The doctor will be right in. Do you feel safe going home tonight?" "Yes," I answered honestly. "They're gone now." The doctor who stitched me up was a young man named Ryan, probably early 30s, with steady hands and a serious expression. He numbed the area, which helped with the immediate pain but did nothing for the deeper ache in my chest. As he worked, making small, precise stitches to pull the flesh back together, he asked the same question the nurse had. "Do you want to file a police report?" "It's already been filed," I told him. He paused mid-stitch, looked at me with new respect. "Good," he said firmly. "I see too many domestic violence victims who refuse to report. You're doing the right thing." Domestic violence. The words sounded strange applied to my situation. I was 65 years old, 6 feet tall, had worked construction jobs to pay for college, but my son was 37, strong, and angry enough to throw glass at my face. Age and biology don't make you immune to abuse. While the doctor worked, my phone buzzed continuously in my pocket. I didn't look at it until after Head finished. After Head placed 12 stitches along my cheekbone and jaw. After Head bandaged it and given me instructions for care and prescriptions for antibiotics and pain medication. In the bathroom, I finally checked my messages. 23 texts from Brandon. I read them in order, watched the progression from anger to panic. 2:15 a.m. "You better not have called the cops." 2:17 a.m. "Dad, the police just came to my house." 2:19 a.m. "What did you tell them?" 2:22 a.m. "This is insane. I'm your son." 2:26 a.m. "You're destroying our family over an accident." 2:30 a.m. "Amanda is hysterical. The kids are scared. What have you done?" 2:35 a.m. "I could go to jail because you're being vindictive." The messages continued, cycling between blame and panic and attempted manipulation. I didn't respond to any of them. There were also texts from Joseph Harper, my attorney. "Police have viewed the video footage. Brandon is being charged with assault with a weapon, domestic violence, and attempted financial exploitation. They want your statement when you're ready. I've arranged to meet you at the station tomorrow morning at 9. Video footage. The hidden cameras I'd installed in my dining room 2 weeks ago. After consulting with Joseph about how to protect myself, Brandon had no idea had been recorded. None of them did. Every word, Every action, the entire ambush and assault had been captured in high-definition video from 3 different angles. Another text from Janet Holloway, the private investigator Id hired a month ago. Got some interesting news. Call when you can. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, engine running for warmth, and called Janet. She answered on the first ring. "How are you holding up?" she asked. 12 stitches and a lot of regret," I said. "What's the news?" "Amanda filed for a restraining order against you 3 hours ago. Claims you attacked Brandon and threatened the family." I felt a cold wave wash over me. "She's lying." "I know," Janet said. "The police know too. They have the video evidence. Your medical report. The timeline that proves she's lying. But she's already posted on social media. She's painting you as an abusive, unstable old man who violently attacked his son during Easter dinner." I closed my eyes, leaned my head back against the seat. So this is how they're going to play it. They're desperate, Nelson. Desperate people do desperate things. But here is what matters. You have documentation. You have evidence. You have witnesses, medical reports, video footage. The truth is on your side. What about Chloe and Tyler? That was my biggest fear. The question that kept me awake at night. Janet was quiet for a moment. "Amanda's already told them they can't see you anymore. Says you're dangerous." My heart broke hearing those words. Those children, who had read bedtime stories to, who had taught to ride bikes and bake cookies with, who called me Papa and climbed into my lap for hugs. Gone. Because their mother was covering for their father's violence by creating a false narrative. "I know this hurts," Janet said gently, "but you're doing the right thing. These patterns don't stop unless someone stops them. You're protecting yourself and potentially saving those kids from witnessing worse down the road." We talked for another 10 minutes. She updated me on her investigation. Brandon's gambling debts were worse than Shed initially found, over $90,000 now. Amanda knew everything, had been helping him hide it. Gerald's business hadn't just failed, had committed fraud, had barely avoided prosecution by settling with his creditors. Patricia had a shopping addiction that had drained their retirement savings. The plan to move into my house wasn't just about having a place to stay. It was step 1 of a larger scheme to establish residency, then claim I was mentally incompetent, take control of my assets through a conservatorship, and drain everything he'd spent 40 years building. Gerald had done it before to his own mother 10 years ago. Janet had found the court records, testimony from Gerald's sister who'd tried to fight it and failed. Gerald's mother had died in a state-run nursing home, penniless, while Gerald lived in her house and spent her money. That was their plan for me. I drove home around 4 a.m. My house was exactly as I'd left it. Broken glass on the dining room floor, blood-stained tablecloth, destroyed Easter dinner. I didn't clean it up. Joseph had told me to preserve everything for documentation. Instead, I took dozens of photos with my phone, making sure to get clear images of the blood, the broken glass, the overturned chairs, the wine stains on the wall where Brandon had stood. Then I sat in my living room, in the armchair where Margaret used to read, and let myself feel the full weight of what he'd lost. My son, who I'd raised and loved and tried to guide into being a good man, was gone. The boy who used to climb into my lap and ask me to explain how bridges worked, who'd been fascinated by my engineering drawings, who'd once told me he wanted to be just like me. That boy had become a man I didn't recognize, a man capable of violence, manipulation, and betrayal. And my grandchildren, Chloe, with her love of stories, and her bright laugh, Tyler, with his endless curiosity, and his obsession with trucks. I might never see them grow up, might never teach Chloe to drive or help Tyler with his math homework or walk Chloe down the aisle at her wedding someday. Amanda would make sure they heard only her version of events, would poison them against me, would use them as weapons and shields. I sat there until dawn, watching the sunrise through Margaret's lace curtains, and made peace with the cost of protecting myself. Because the alternative was worse. The alternative was letting them move in, slowly taking over my life, isolating me from friends, controlling my finances, maybe eventually succeeding in their conservatorship plan. The alternative was becoming another elder abuse statistic, Another vulnerable senior exploited by their own family. I thought about what Margaret would say if she were still alive. She had always been the emotional compass of our family, the one who could see people's hearts clearly. Would she be disappointed in me for taking such a hard line? Or would she understand that sometimes love requires boundaries? That protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. I wanted to believe she'd understand. I had to believe it. The next morning, I met Joseph Harper at the police station at 9 a.m. Exactly. My face was swollen and bruised, the bandage white against my skin. Joseph was a tall man in his 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Had been practicing elder law for 30 years, and had seen every scheme, every manipulation, every form of financial exploitation imaginable. Before we went in, he briefed me in his car. Brandon made bail this morning. $5,000. Gerald paid it. Has already violated the no-contact order 4 times, calling your phone repeatedly. We're documenting every violation. What happens now? I asked. We give your statement. Then we wait for the criminal trial. But Nelson, you need to understand something. This is going to get uglier before it gets better. They're going to fight this with everything they have because they're terrified of the consequences. He was right. Over the next 3 days, Amanda's social media campaign intensified. She posted photos of Brandon's mugshot, claiming he'd been falsely arrested. She wrote long posts about elder abuse, but with herself cast as the victim and me as the abuser. She claimed he'd been mentally declining since Margaret died, that I'd become paranoid and violent, that Brandon had only been trying to help me. Some people believed her. A few acquaintances from church, people who didn't know me well, left sympathetic comments on her posts. But most people who actually knew me saw through it. My neighbors, who'd seen me maintain my home and garden meticulously for years, who'd watched me volunteer at the library every week, who knew I was sharp and capable. Margaret's friends, who I still met for coffee monthly. My former colleagues from the engineering firm, who I'd worked with for decades. Several of them contacted me directly to offer support. My old supervisor, a man named Robert, called to say he'd be a character witness if needed. My neighbor, a woman named Patricia who shared the name with Brandon's mother-in-law but none of her characteristics, brought me a casserole and told me she'd seen Brandon's car outside my house that day, had heard shouting, and would testify if necessary. The most surprising support came from a former co-worker of Brandon's, a man named David who reached out to Janet. He told her Brandon had been fired from his previous job 2 years ago for threatening a supervisor during a performance review. The company had kept it quiet, let him resign instead of terminating him to avoid legal issues. But David remembered. He provided documentation, emails, witness statements. The carefully constructed image of Brandon as a good man driven to desperation was crumbling under the weight of evidence. Joseph filed countersuit. Financial exploitation of an elder, attempted fraud, conspiracy. He named not just Brandon, but Amanda and Gerald as well. Gerald's past conservatorship scheme became relevant legal precedent, showing a pattern of elder exploitation. Joseph also filed for an emergency protective order on my behalf, which the judge granted immediately after viewing the video footage from my dining room. That footage was damning. You could clearly see Gerald and Patricia arriving with suitcases, Brandon announcing they were moving in without my consent. You could hear every word of the argument, see Gerald's aggression, hear Brandon's threats. And you could see, in perfect clarity, Brandon throwing that glass of wine at my face with enough force to shatter it against my cheekbone. There was no way to claim it was an accident, no way to deny what had happened. The preliminary hearing was held 2 weeks after Easter. I sat in the courtroom, my face still healing but the stitches removed, a scar forming that would be permanent. Brandon sat at the defendant's table with his attorney, a public defender who looked tired and overworked. Amanda sat in the gallery behind him, along with Gerald and Patricia. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Helen Morrison, known for her no-nonsense approach to domestic violence cases. She watched the video footage without expression, then reviewed the medical reports, the police statements, the documentation of Brandon's prior arrest. Brandon's attorney tried to argue temporary insanity brought on by extreme stress. But Joseph introduced the prior arrest record from 2 years ago. Same pattern, same loss of control, same violence. The judge's expression hardened. Then Joseph introduced Amanda's false restraining order and her defamatory social media posts as evidence of ongoing harassment and attempt to manipulate the narrative. He showed screenshots of her posts with timestamps proving Shed started her campaign while I was still in the emergency room getting stitches. Gerald's history of elder exploitation was presented next. Court documents from his mother's case, testimony that had been sealed but was now relevant. The pattern was clear. Gerald targeted vulnerable elderly people, established control, then drained their resources. The judge reviewed everything methodically. Then she made her ruling. Criminal trial would proceed on charges of assault with a weapon and domestic violence. The protective orders would remain in place, and she added an additional order, freezing any attempts by Brandon, Amanda, or Gerald to file claims against my estate or initiate any legal actions regarding inheritance or conservatorship. Brandon's attorney tried to object, but Judge Morrison cut him off. Based on the evidence presented, this appears to be a calculated attempt at elder exploitation that escalated to violence when the victim refused to comply. I'm not going to allow that pattern to continue through legal manipulation. As the hearing concluded, Amanda suddenly stood up in the gallery. Her chair scraped loudly in the quiet courtroom. She shouted that this was all my fault, that Eid turned Brandon into this, that Eid been a terrible father who'd abandoned his family for work. The judge warned her to sit down. Amanda didn't. She continued her outburst, and then revealed something that shocked everyone. She was pregnant with their third child. Brandon was the only provider. I was destroying their family out of spite, and then, in her emotional breakdown, she admitted what Joseph had been trying to prove. Yes, we needed his house. Because we're broke, we have nothing, and what was he going to do with all those empty rooms anyway? Her confession in open court was like watching someone dig their own grave. Shed just confirmed every element of the exploitation plan. The judge ordered her removed for contempt. As bailiffs escorted her out, she screamed at me that she hoped I died alone, that my grandchildren would never know me, that I was a monster. Nelson sat quietly through it all. His attorney leaned over and whispered, "She just confessed to the entire scheme in open court. It's over. You won." But victory felt hollow, because what Id won was my safety and my assets. What Id lost was my family. 6 months passed, like a river moving slowly but inevitably toward the sea. It was October now, the leaves turning gold and red outside my windows, Margaret's favorite season. I sat in my living room on a cool evening, drinking chamomile tea, looking at old photos of our life together. My face had healed completely, leaving only a thin scar along my cheekbone and jaw, a permanent reminder of the night my family broke apart. The criminal trial had concluded 3 weeks ago. Brandon was convicted of assault with a weapon and domestic violence. The judge sentenced him to 18 months in prison plus 3 years probation. It was less than the maximum, but more than the minimum. The judge cited his prior arrest record and the calculated nature of the assault as aggravating factors, but also acknowledged his lack of other violent offenses on record and his 3 children as reasons for some leniency. Amanda and Gerald faced civil judgments for conspiracy and attempted fraud. They were ordered to pay restitution and court costs totaling over $30,000, money they didn't have and likely never would. Gerald's past conservatorship fraud case had been reopened by prosecutors in that jurisdiction. He was facing new charges there, old crimes coming back to haunt him. The house Amanda and Brandon had been renting went into foreclosure when they couldn't pay rent. Last I'd heard from Janet, they'd moved to another state to live with one of Amanda's relatives, taking the children with them. Chloe and Tyler were gone from my life, living hundreds of miles away, being raised by people who believed I was a monster who had destroyed their family. That was the part that hurt most, not the assault, not the betrayal, not even the loss of my son, but the loss of my grandchildren. Knowing they were growing up hearing lies about me. Knowing Chloe would turn 9 soon and I wouldn't be there for her birthday. Knowing Tyler would start kindergarten and I wouldn't see his first day of school photos. Joseph had advised me I could pursue grandparent visitation rights through the courts. Virginia law allowed it under certain circumstances. but Id chosen not to. Not yet. I wanted Brandon to serve his sentence, hopefully get the counseling the judge had mandated, hopefully have time to reflect and maybe change. I wanted the children to be older, better able to understand complexity and nuance. Forcing visitation through courts right now would only traumatize them further, make me the villain in their story. So, I waited. I hoped. I grieved. I'd written letters to both Chloe and Tyler, long letters explaining everything that had happened and why I'd done what I'd done. I saved them in a wooden box on my desk. Letters for a future that might never come. Letters explaining that I loved them, that I'd always loved them, that protecting myself didn't mean I didn't care about them. But life had continued, despite the pain. I'd found new routines, new purpose. I attended a support group for elder abuse survivors twice a month. The first meeting had been hard, walking into a church basement and seeing a dozen other seniors sitting in a circle, each with their own story of betrayal by family members. But their stories helped me understand I wasn't alone. There was Helen, 72, whose daughter had stolen her identity and opened credit cards in her name. There was James, 68, whose son had forged his signature on a reverse mortgage and nearly taken his house. There was Dorothy, 70, whose grandson had physically abused her while living in her home rent-free. Each story was different, but the pattern was the same. Family members who saw their elderly relatives as resources to be exploited rather than people to be loved. I shared my story with them. The first time I spoke, my voice shook, and I had to stop several times to compose myself. But they understood. They didn't judge. They knew that fighting back doesn't make you vindictive. It makes you a survivor. Through that group, I'd become an unexpected advocate. I started giving talks at senior centers about recognizing warning signs of financial exploitation. I worked with Joseph's law firm to create educational materials about protecting yourself legally. I helped fund Janet's investigation business, which now specialized in elder abuse cases, helping other families document evidence before situations escalated to violence. In a strange way, the worst thing that had ever happened to me had given me new purpose. Margaret would have been proud, I thought. She always said my analytical mind and attention to detail would be useful beyond engineering. She was right. It also started living again in small ways. I still volunteered at the library every week, but I'd added a new program, teaching basic computer skills to seniors. I walked my 3 miles every morning, tended Margaret's garden, kept the house exactly how Shed loved it. I'd reconnected with old colleagues from work, had lunch with them monthly. Robert, my former supervisor, had become a genuine friend. We played chess every other week, arguing good-naturedly about strategies and old projects we'd worked on together. And there was Dorothy from the support group. Not the same Dorothy from the neighborhood who'd brought me casserole, but Dorothy from the group who'd shared her story about her grandson. We'd started having coffee after meetings, just talking about life and loss and healing. It wasn't romance, not really, just companionship with someone who understood. She made me laugh, which I hadn't done much of in the past 6 months. Margaret had been gone 3 years now. I would never stop loving her, but I was learning that life continues, that it's okay to find joy again. Joseph Harper had become more than my attorney. He was a friend now, too. We played chess every Thursday evening, a standing appointment that gave structure to my week. Had never married, dedicated his life to his practice, and he understood loneliness in a way others didn't. We talked about cases, about law, about life. He told me stories about other clients, other elder abuse situations had handled. Some had ended well, with families reconciling after therapy and accountability. Others had ended in permanent estrangement, families broken beyond repair. I didn't know yet which category mine would fall into. One afternoon in October, I received a letter that changed something in me. It arrived in a plain envelope with a prison return address. My hands shook as I opened it. The handwriting was Brandon's, messy and hurried, words crossed out and rewritten. The letter was short. He didn't apologize directly, which disappointed me at first, but he acknowledged had been wrong. He wrote about the court-mandated counseling he was receiving, about confronting his gambling addiction for the first time, about realizing how manipulative Amanda had been, how Head let her and her father influence his thinking and his actions. He wrote about how prison had given him time to think clearly, away from the pressure and the debts and the constant anxiety. He wrote that he understood why I'd done what I'd done, that I'd been protecting myself from something he hadn't even fully understood he was doing. He wrote that he hoped someday, maybe when he got out, we could talk. He wrote that he wanted Chloe and Tyler to know their grandfather, that he understood if I never wanted to see him again but hoped I might still have a relationship with his children somehow. The letter ended with 5 words. I destroyed us, Dad. Then a sentence. You just refused to let me destroy you too. And finally, I'm sorry. I read that letter 5 times. Sitting at my kitchen table as the afternoon light faded, I cried, something I rarely allowed myself to do. These weren't tears of joy exactly, but tears of release, of grief acknowledged, of a door opening just a crack to let in the possibility of light. I didn't write back immediately. I needed time to process, to think, to decide what forgiveness might look like and whether I was capable of it. But for the first time in 6 months, I felt something other than loss. Not hope exactly, but possibility. The understanding that endings don't have to be permanent, that people can change if they're willing to do the hard work, that maybe someday there could be healing. My daily life had found a rhythm I could sustain. The house no longer felt like a monument to the past, but like a home again. I'd redecorated the dining room completely. Couldn't bear to look at it as it had been. New paint, new curtains, new table and chairs. Margaret's china was carefully packed away in the attic. Maybe someday I'd use it again, but not yet. I kept Chloe and Tyler's rooms exactly as they'd left them, though books on the shelves, toys in the bins, beds made with their favorite blankets, just in case, just in hope. The legal situation had settled into a new normal. The protective orders remained in place. Brandon would be eligible for parole in 9 months if he maintained good behavior. Amanda had stopped her social media campaign after her attorney advised her it could be used against her in future custody proceedings. Gerald was facing trial in another state and had bigger problems than me now. He'd learned so much over these 6 months, about manipulation and how it wears the mask of need, about how family doesn't grant automatic access to your resources or your life, about how love without boundaries becomes exploitation, about how protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary survival. It learned that the people who truly love you will respect your autonomy, will work with you rather than against you, will see you as a full human being, with rights and dignity, rather than as a resource to be managed or exploited. It learned that saying no is sometimes the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for the person who needs to hear it. It learned about elder abuse in America, how common it is, how hidden it remains. 1 in 10 seniors experiences some form of abuse, financial or physical or emotional. Most never report it. They're ashamed, or scared, or convinced by their abusers that they're the problem. They're isolated from friends and support systems. They're made to believe that accepting abuse is what good parents or grandparents do. But it also learned about resilience, about the strength it takes to stand up to people you love when they're hurting you, about the courage required to choose yourself when everyone is telling you you're being selfish, about finding purpose in pain, about turning your worst experience into something that might help others. One evening, as the sun set and the October air grew cool, I stood in my backyard looking at Margaret's garden. The roses she'd planted were blooming their last flowers before winter. The leaves on the maple tree were turning brilliant shades of gold and red, her favorite colors. I thought about everything it'd been through, everything it'd lost, everything it'd learned. I thought about legacy. I used to believe legacy was what you left behind when you died. Money, property, family who remembered you fondly. But now I understood that legacy was also about how you lived, what you stood for, what you refused to accept. My grandchildren would grow up hearing Amanda's version of events. But someday they'd be old enough to seek out the truth, to read court records, to ask questions, to form their own understanding. And when that day came, they'd see a grandfather who'd protected himself with dignity, who'd refused to be exploited, who'd stood up for his own humanity, even at tremendous cost. Maybe they'd understand, maybe they wouldn't, but at least they'd see that you don't have to accept abuse from anyone, even family, even people you love. I turned back toward my house. The lights were warm in the windows. Tomorrow I'd meet with another elder abuse victim, someone who'd found my name through the advocacy network. Next week, I'd have coffee with Dorothy, who always made me smile. Next month, I'd decide whether to write back to Brandon, whether I was ready for that conversation. And someday, somehow, I'd find a way to reconnect with Chloe and Tyler, even if it took years, even if I had to wait until they were adults and could make their own choices about relationships. I would wait, and hope, and keep their rooms ready. But tonight, right now in this moment, I was enough. My life was enough. My choice to fight back, to protect myself, to refuse exploitation was enough. I walked inside, closed the door behind me, and felt something I hadn't felt since Margaret died, something I'd thought I'd lost forever that Easter evening when my son threw wine and glass at my face. Peace, not happiness exactly, not the absence of pain or loss or grief, but peace with my choices, peace with my path, peace with myself. Despite everything I'd lost, despite the scar on my face and the emptiness where my family used to be, I'd gained something invaluable. I'd gained myself back, my autonomy, my dignity, my right to live in my own home on my own terms. And in the end, that was worth fighting for. That was worth the cost. I learned that being selfish means taking what isn't yours. Protecting what is yours isn't selfish. It's survival. I learned that family is a privilege earned through mutual respect, not a right to exploitation granted by biology. I learned that the people who truly love you will honor your boundaries, and those who don't really love you at all. They love what you can give them, what they can take from you. Most importantly, I learned that you can lose everything and still not lose yourself, if you're willing to fight for your own dignity. That Easter dinner cost me my son, my grandchildren, and a piece of my heart that will always ache with their absence. But it gave me back my life, my safety, my future. And in the end, that was a trade I had no choice but to make. If you're facing something similar, if someone in your family is pressuring you, manipulating you, making you feel guilty for having boundaries, I want you to know this. You are not selfish for protecting yourself. You are not wrong for saying no. You are not cruel for demanding respect. Your home, your assets, your life, they belong to you, and anyone who truly loves you will understand that. Document everything. Seek help. Trust your instincts. And remember that choosing yourself isn't betrayal. It's survival. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? Have you experienced situations where love was confused with obligation, where saying no felt impossible? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's struggling with similar challenges right now. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real stories about family, boundaries, and finding strength in difficult situations. And please share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it wasn't easy to hear. It certainly wasn't easy to live through, but I'm grateful you took the time to understand what happened and why I made the choices I made. I hope you find the courage to protect yourself when you need to, and the wisdom to know when that time has come. Take care of yourselves, and remember, you deserve respect, safety, and dignity, no matter who's asking you to give them up.